The morning sun filtered gently through the tall, arched windows of the county courthouse, casting warm streaks of light across the polished tile floor. There was a hush in the courtroom, broken only by the soft rustle of papers and the echo of footsteps along the marble aisle. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, a minor hearing. Nothing to make anyone pause. A witness statement in an open case about some missing neighborhood dogs. A few simple facts, a brief testimony, and everyone could return to their day. That's what everyone expected anyway. Sitting quietly near the front, nestled between the rows of wooden benches, was Lily Dawson, the delicate 4-year-old girl with chestnut curls tied back in a faded green ribbon. Her small hands clutched a threadbare stuffed puppy against her chest, as if holding on to something that might offer her comfort in the midst of the unfamiliar. Lily wasn't there as a witness. She wasn't even supposed to be there at all. She had come along because there was no one else to watch her that morning. Daycare was closed, and Monica, her mother, had no family nearby to help. So, Lily sat, silent and still, her eyes wide with the quiet innocence of a child too young to understand the weight of what was unfolding around her. Next to her, Monica, a part-time cleaning woman, sat nervously, her hands twisting in her lap. She had been called to testify because months ago she had briefly worked as a contracted janitor at a dog training facility. She couldn't remember much the name of the place, the exact location. A van had picked her up, dropped her off, and left her to work in a haze of bleach and unfamiliar surroundings. She hadn't kept a map, just memories that felt like bits and pieces lost in time. The investigators hoped that Monica's recollections might help pinpoint the facility, but no one was expecting anything more than a vague mention of cleaning supplies or the smell of kennels. As the bailiff called the room to order and the judge entered with the usual routine formality, no one paid much attention to the quiet little girl in the front row. She was just a small child, sitting still, her gaze distant, seemingly unaware of the adults around her. But sometimes it's the smallest witnesses who carry the heaviest truths. At precisely 9:04 a.m., the side door of the courtroom opened with a soft thud. 3 uniformed officers entered, their boots echoing off the polished floor. Leading them was Officer Mark Holden, tall and square-jawed, his posture composed and confident, a canine harness slung tightly across his shoulder. Right beside him was Shadow, a black and tan German shepherd, built like a tank but moving with perfect discipline. Heads turned briefly as they passed down the aisle, but no one paid them much attention. Officers and canine units were a routine presence in hearings involving open investigations. Officer Holden was known for his reliability. A steady handler, calm, detached, and methodical. Shadow, too, was well known. His eyes scanned the room, his steps crisp, his movements precise. The badge on his vest gleamed in the overhead lights, catching the light as he moved. Shadow was alert, but not threatening, the kind of dog you'd expect to be trained for control. Not intimidation. Except someone noticed Lily. She had been quietly kicking her feet beneath the bench, her fingers gently playing with the ears of her stuffed dog. But the moment Shadow walked into the room, something changed. She froze. Her small body went still, as if time itself had momentarily stopped. Her eyes locked onto Officer Holden, and it wasn't just a simple freeze. There was a recoil in her posture, as if something cold and unseen had touched her spine. Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then her grip on the stuffed toy tightened until her knuckles went white. There was no confusion in her eyes, no innocent curiosity, only raw, unfiltered fear. It wasn't the startled fear children sometimes show around unfamiliar faces or uniforms. No. This was deeper, primal, the kind of fear that's woven into memory, the kind of fear that lingers in the soul long after the event, and in that moment it became clear to everyone in the room. A child that age couldn't fake that kind of fear. Then came two words. Soft, quiet, but cutting through the stillness like a bell. "Bad, ma'am." At first, no one reacted. The room seemed to hold its breath, unsure of what had just happened. Then Lily stood up on the bench, her small figure barely taller than the backrest. She pointed a tiny finger toward Officer Holden and repeated, "He locked me." The room froze. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the little girl, her voice breaking the calm, turning the mundane moment into something much darker. Monica's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes locked on her daughter, her heart pounding in her chest, but Holden didn't flinch. He remained still, his face impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. Judge Clara Bennett leaned forward, her expression now serious, a glint of concern in her eyes. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady but tight with a shift in the air. Monica trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "She's just a child." But Lily wasn't confused. She remembered the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Bennett didn't. "Speak right away." Her gaze lingered on Lily, then shifted to Holden. Woe's posture remained perfect, but too perfect, too composed. The moment snapped like drywood. 15-minute recess. The judge ordered, her voice sharp. "Bafe escort Officer Holden to my chambers." Now Monica knelt beside her daughter, her voice a trembling whisper. "Lily, baby, what did you mean? When did he lock you?" Lily hesitated. She looked at the floor, her tiny fingers wrapped around her toy. "Ath place," she said softly with the barking judge. Bennett, still within earshot, turned slowly. "The barking?" Lily nodded. "Detective Jonah." Prissy, a veteran investigator seated quietly in the gallery, was already on his feet walking toward them. "My name is Jonah," he said, gently crouching down to Lily's level. "Can you tell me more about this place?" Lily clung to Monica's sleeve, then slowly. "It smelled like metal." "That wassail," she said, but it was enough. Monica's face went pale. She looked up at the detective. "I think I know what she's talking about," she whispered. She explained that months ago she had worked part-time as a cleaner for a private dog training facility. The location was never shared with her. A black van picked her up and dropped her off one day when she had no sitter. She brought Lily with her. The little girl had wandered off. For 4 hours she was gone. They found her at the far end of the compound inside a locked supply room, silent, shaken at that time. They thought she had just gotten lost, but Lily hadn't forgotten. Not Theplis, not the sound, not the man. Officer Mark Holden stood in the judge chambers like a statue carved from stone, arms behind his back, chin up, expression unreadable. He denied everything, calm and professionally. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, "I believe that child is confused, perhaps overwhelmed by the setting." Judge Bennett didn't respond immediately. She simply watched him, assessing. Meanwhile, outside in the waiting room, Shadow was pacing. Thedog had been calm when first arriving, but after Lily's words, something in his demeanor shifted. His eyes no longer scanned aimlessly, they searched. His ears twitched sharply with every footstep. And when Monica and Lily re-entered the hallway, Shadow froze. Then, without command, he walked directly to Lily. He didn't bark, hadn't growl. He sat in front of her, quietly, head lowered in something closer reverence. Lily looked up, her eyes wide but unafraid. Now her hand moved slowly to rest on Shadow's head. The contact was instant, familiar. Detective Jonah Price noticed every fiber of his instincts lit up. "You've seen that dog before, haven't you?" he asked Lily gently. She nodded. He stayed by the door. Price glanced at Monica, who looked just as stunned. "She never mentioned Thedog," she whispered. "I didn't think she ever saw him there." Shadow's eyes lifted toward Holden's closed door, and for the first time since entering the building, the dog let out a sound, a low, throaty growl, not of anger, but warning. Detective Price narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And the dog remembered too. Shadow lay calmly in a side examination room of the courthouse's dark fur, rising and falling with steady breaths. Beside him knelt Dr. Samuel Trent, a trauma behaviorist, foreworking. Dogs called in by Judge Benetot Detective Price's urgent request had offered no resistance, no tension, but as Dr. Trent gently lifted one of Shadow's hind legs, his breath caught there were scars fresh and old beneath thick fur-thin burns across the skin lash, marks, circular indentations, nerve ribs, all consistent with restraint, shock training, and physical punishment. This dog has been abused, Dr. Trent said grimly, by someone who knew how to hide. Detective Price, standing behind him, tensed. You mean trained to take pain without reacting? Trent nodded, exactly, silent. Suffering. They've conditioned him not to flinch. Shadow didn't whine, hadn't growl, but when Dr. Trent brushed Asmal patch near his flank, the dog's muscles tensed involuntarily and High's eyes darted just once toward the hallway where Lily sat waiting. With Monica Dr. Trent paused. Whoever did this, he said quietly, didn't just try to break him, they failed. He still protects. Price looked toward the hallway. Bring that girl, he said. When Lily entered the room, Shadow immediately lifted his head, his ears perked, and his tail gave one small thump against the floor. The moment her hand touched his fur, his body relaxed completely. Dr. Trent observed them silently. He trusts her, Hemmer mirrored, and he fears the one who came for her. A child's testimony could be questioned, but a dog's body didn't lie. Shadow remembered, and his silence was no longer empty. It became evidence. The search warrant came sooner than expected. By late afternoon, a police team arrived at a private storage facility registered under Officer Mark Holden's name. The address had been quietly flagged during an unrelated inspection 6 months ago, but no one followed up until now. Detective Jonah Price led the team down a row of metal doors until they reached Unit 117. A bolt cutter snapped the padlock. The door groaned open. What they found inside chilled everyone. In one corner were stacks of file boxes, each labeled with a name, breed, and temperament notes. Polaroid photos were clipped to many showing dogs in cages, on leashes, some muzzled. Most of the dogs listed were confirmed missing, reported by families across the state over the past 2 years. Along the back wall stood rows of custom-built cages. Some were rusted, some had claw marks on the inside. In a far corner sat a leather-wrapped baton, a shock collar, and an old training whip. On the concrete floor were faint scratch marks, as if something had tried to dig its way out. Detective Price crouched and ran his fingers along one of the cages. This wasn't a storage unit, he murmured. It was a kennel, a prison. Detective, one officer called. There's a dog tag here. Looks like it belonged to Shadow. Price took the tag. The ID number matched the one still on Shadow's vest. There was no denying it now. This place wasn't just connected to Holden. It was where Shadow had been broken and where he chose not to stay silent. With quiet approval from Judge Bennett, Detective Price organized a special operation. Shadow was fitted with a lightweight tracking harness. Lily and Monica rode along in an unmarked van. They traveled deep into rural roads that twisted out from the city's edge. Monica sat silently, watching the trees pass. Her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know the address. They never told me. But maybe if I see the road, the turns, I'll remember. After nearly an hour, the van turned onto a gravel road lined with pine trees. Shadow suddenly perked up. His ears shot forward. Without prompting, he pressed his nose to the side window and let out a low whine. This is it, Monica whispered. This is the road. At the end of the path stood a rusted gate with a wooden sign that simply read Canine Solutions. The facility was hidden deep within the woods, camouflaged and quiet. As soon as the gate creaked open, Shadow leapt out. He ran a head tail low, nose to the ground, tracking every scent like he had been there just yesterday. The officers followed closely. Inside, the compound told its own story. Rows of cages, hidden cameras tucked into trees, scratch marks on door frames. The smell of bleach and fear clung to the air. Monica stepped forward slowly. "This is where I worked," she said, voice trembling. "And that building," she pointed to a gray metal structure. "That's where we found Lily. The storage room at the back." Price turned to his team. "Secure the area. Nobody leaves. We found it." The silence of the forest was shattered. The truth had roots here, and now it was unearthed. Back at the courthouse, Officer Mark Holden sat across from Detective Price in an interrogation room. His uniform had been replaced by plain clothes, but he remained rigid, every muscle tense. He said nothing for hours, until they brought in Shadow. The moment the dog entered the room, Holden's jaw clenched. He didn't look directly, but his hands curled into fists. Shadow stood silently at the door. No bark, no growl, just a steady stare locked on his former handler. Then Price placed 2 photos on the table. One showed the rusted cages at the forest compound. The second was Lily's crayon drawing of a dog behind bars. "She remembers," Price said, "and so does he." Holden didn't blink, but something inside him cracked. "You don't understand," he said finally. "It wasn't just me." Price leaned forward. "Then tell us." Holden exhaled. "There's a list? Clients, organizations?" "They wanted dogs trained outside the law, aggressive, silent, obedient. We took the strongest strays, bought others off record. Even stole a few." "And Lily?" Price asked. Holden's eyes flickered. His voice dropped. "She wasn't supposed to see it. She opened the wrong door. I was training Shadow. He disobeyed a command. I had to reinforce control. It wasn't abuse, it was part of the process." Price stayed silent. "She screamed." Holden continued, louder now. "I panicked. I shut the door. I told her if she said a word, something worse would happen to the dog." His hands trembled. "But then the dog crawled toward her. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just put her hand on his head, whispered something, and sat beside him for 2 hours. She didn't move." From the hallway, Shadow let out a low, haunting sound, not a growl. Grief. At that moment, Lily appeared at the doorway. She pointed. "He heard him," she said softly. Holden's face went pale. Detective Price stood. "That's enough. You're under arrest." The officers moved in. Holden didn't resist. There was nothing left, only truth, and the silence of a dog who had never forgotten. Weeks later, the courtroom looked nothing like it did that morning. Now it was packed wall to wall. Reporters, animal rights advocates, uniformed officers, and families holding photos of their lost pets. Mark Holden stood at the center, cuffed, awaiting sentencing. But the room's eyes weren't on him. They were on the little girl in the front row. Lily, wearing a soft blue dress, sat beside Shadow, who now wore a clean white canine therapy vest. He sat tall and calm, his eyes locked on her. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak, the room turned to Detective Price. He didn't speak. Instead, he motioned to Lily. The room held its breath. Lily leaned toward Shadow, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "You stayed." Just 2 words, but they echoed louder than any testimony. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. "This court acknowledges the integrity of this animal and the bravery of a child." Holden received his sentence, but it was Lily and Shadow, still seated together, who received the silence of respect. Shadow had once protected Lily in silence under threat. But in the end, it was Lily who saved Shadow. She didn't use force. She didn't need words. She used kindness, something deeper than commands, stronger than chains. When Shadow was rescued from the system that broke him, it was Lily who gave him a real home, a safe one, a place with crayons on the floor and soft music playing in the chill background, where no commands were shouted and no pain was punishment. In that little house, Shadow changed. He stopped flinching at sudden sounds. He wagged his tail when Lily came home from preschool. At night, when she had bad dreams, he would curl beside her bed, head resting near her pillow, watching her breathe until morning. Lily, only 4 years old, had no therapy training, no special words, but she had love. And that was enough. There. Story reminded the world of something too often forgotten. Animals don't need perfect people. They need people who care, people who stay, people who see past the bark, the scars. Sometimes, the smallest hearts carry the strongest hope. In a world that once locked him in darkness, Shadow found light again, not in a handler, not in a command, but in the open arms of a little girl who simply whispered, "You're safe now."